Welcome, everyone. Um, Thank you for coming on to our latest Intersectionalities in Practice conversation. We are, as we always do, just going to give folks a couple of minutes to join us. And as we do that, please feel free to say hi in the chat. We always love hearing from folks. Just let us know, whatever you want, where you are, maybe what interest you have in this conversation. The chat function is definitely going to be where we put all of our questions. I try to avoid the Q&A little function in Zoom just because it's like a whole nother screen to look at. And really, truly, this is a conversation, so that as you feel so compelled and so inspired to please just put some thoughts into this conversation. There's going to be many places for all of you to join us if you want to unmute and use your own voice to address this incredible group of people that I have before me. We would love to have your voice as part of this conversation. So either way, but yes, so thank you all so much for joining us. I have been looking forward to this conversation literally for months. And the Intersectionalities and Practice webinar conversation series started over the summer. And so it's been a little over half a year that we've had these almost monthly conversations. And it is all about, when we think about intersectionalities and practice, this is all about, what are we centering here for Food Recovery Network? And at Food Recovery Network, we are centering, access to food and equity, and knowing that there are so many incredible allies, and I'm looking at 3 incredible allies that intersect within that. So for FRN, that is our center. And when we do things well, when we do things in collaboration and with respect and in love with other groups, that is how we make impact so that all communities can thrive. This is a conversation that is very near and dear to my heart. I specifically asked the 3 wonderful guests today to be part of this conversation. They might not have known at the time how deeply personal thriving communities is to me. But when I started my career in the nonprofit space, it was because as a young person who grew up in a working poor family, something that I'm able to talk about a bit more publicly. Just seeing what resources I had before me and who was trying to help me, and in the day-to-day who was there to help me, but also in the structural ways, so that the person you see before you right now, Regina Anderson, can thrive in a larger ecosystem. So forever, I will be engaged in the work to ensure that all of our communities thrive. And when we think about this term resources, what does that mean? What does that look like? That's such a generic term. We can talk about what those resources mean. When we think about thriving and when we think about communities, we're going to dig into that. We're going to dig into that. So without further ado, I'm gonna kick us off. And so for all of you who are joining us, thank you so much for being in community with us today. And for the future listeners, I want to give you a shout out too. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this work. And if you don't feel like you're part of this work at the beginning of this conversation, I hope that you feel that way by the end of the conversation. My name is Regina Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Food Recovery Network, and we are the largest student movement that is fighting food waste and hunger in the United States. And many of you, I hope, know who we are. Please go to our website to learn more about what that looks like, what that entails. And today, during our Intersectionalities and Practice conversation, we are going to talk about how we can help communities thrive. Food is a right. It is a basic human right. And we, at this moment in time, have 42 million people in the United States who do not have enough resources to have consistent access to food. I am appalled. I am upset. I am ready to fight for alongside the 42 million people that I know who are fighting so strongly to get the resources that they deserve. And the whole entire conversation today, as I said earlier, for some of you who are just joining us, is around talking to 3 incredible people who I will say I have the distinct honor of talking about these issues around how our communities thrive. These three amazing brains, think about and try to have a well-rounded understanding of where we're at today and how we got here. And that is a very, that is a very theoretical, that is a very, and a lot of times academic pursuit. And the thing that I find to be so helpful and very unique about the three individuals that we have here is that they're also in practice. So these aren't folks that just sit on panels and say like this and this and this. They are doing the work within our communities. And I just have so much respect for everybody that is here. I wanted to do a very quick land recognition. I am here in Washington, D.C., and I sit on the Piscataway Conoy tribal lands. And this is a community, a group that has long been a steward of the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And so I just wanted to honor and recognize the Piscataway Conoy tribe band. These are two words that they use to self-identify. And I've continued my journey to learn more about these amazing stewards, both ancestrally and in the modern day world. And so thank you to the Piscataway Conoy. And I also wanted to, think about the conversation that we're about to have today. When we think about equity and the work that all of our folks here are engaged in, and the incredible network that is comprised of Food Recovery Network, we know that Black Lives Matter, and we stand with our Asian community to stop Asian hate. This is part of the equity work. This is part of the equity work, and this is part of the human work. And I will also say that I think the conversation today, I would love for everyone to continue to add their hats, their minds, their lenses, whatever you want to call it, of curiosity. We're going to hear some things that maybe we haven't heard before. We're going to hear some different perspectives of information that maybe we have heard before. And I hope that that prompts for everyone questions of curiosity and continued learning, because this is the space, this is why we're here. We're here to learn and do some work. So the three incredible folks have some action steps for us, in each of the words that we're going to hear from everyone. And so please take that as, let's be unique in the way that these three individuals are in hearing about the work, seeing how that shapes us, and then actually, what does it look like in practice to do that work? And so also within that self-care, we might need to take some deep breaths throughout this conversation. I know that I went for a walk right before this call, webinar, deep breaths, calling people that you really love, that love you, maybe reading an article or two, but whatever that self-care looks like for you, to make sure that you are weaving that into our time together today. And so with that, I am going to ask that Elaine, we have a quick poll for everyone. And this is just a gauge for me and for the amazing team at Food Recovery Network, of which Elaine is an incredible, integral part of. Just so we can get a better sense of, what is on your minds. How do you feel about the topic at hand? And then we will have a closing poll as well. A quick reminder, this is the last Intersectionalities in Practice conversation for 2021. It's been quite a wonderful, beautiful journey, and we have a page on our website where you can read and listen to some of the other conversations, and we will absolutely put this conversation onto our website as well. So please do take a peek at this poll that we have. We're just trying to see who's in the room. Also put that into chat. That would be amazing. So thank you all for doing that. In December, I'm still going to have a cool FRN-centric multiple conversations and multiple writings. I'll keep it a little bit of a surprise. And then when we kickstart 2022, which I feel like is tomorrow, we're gonna continue on with our intersectionalities in practice, and it's really going to focus in on the practice. It's really going to focus in on the advocacy work and in partnerships that we have. And with that, partnerships, advocacy, I would like to turn to begin the conversation with our first invited brain, amazing speaker, and that's Shailly Barnes. And I'm going to say a couple of things about Shailly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Elaine Loskamp, our amazing program associate, to more formally talk about Shailly's bio, because my gosh, we are all in for such a moment right now. So I know I specifically sought out Shailly. I asked a couple of my colleagues who work at different organizations. I will shout them out, the Congressional Hunger Center, because I was like, I wanted to get to know the folks over at the Poor People's Campaign at the national level. Because for Food Recovery Network, when we think about equity at the center, when we think about 42 million people who do not have enough food to eat right now currently, who is working on that? Who is helping to ensure that we're not just being placated to systems that aren't really changing this astronomical number? And so our friends over at the Congressional Hunger Center put me in touch with Shailly. I'm so thankful. And Shailly is going to dig in more about the Poor People's Campaign and has some words for us, for us all to listen to. But before we do that, Elaine, would you mind giving us a little bit more background on Shailly?
Absolutely. Shailly Barnes is the policy director of both the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the Kairos Center for Rights, Religions, and Social Justice, which is one of the national anchor organizations of the Poor People's Campaign. She has a background in law, economics, and human rights, and has spent more than 17 years working with and for poor and dispossessed communities. And thank you so much for joining us today, Shailly.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here and to be part of this conversation with Regina and Elaine and Niciah and Tiana and everyone who's here. This is, as Regina was saying, one of the most pressing issues of our time, that we live in an era and a country of great wealth and abundance, and yet 42 million people don't know if they're going to don't know where their next meal is going to be coming from. And so I just wanted to say a few minutes, a little bit about the Poor People's Campaign, what that is, and then, from our perspective, how we understand this broad-based kind of community disinvestment, what that even means, what it looks like, where it came from, and then what we do about it. So the Poor People's Campaign was launched in 2018, picking up the mantle of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, which was Martin Luther King's last campaign. And 50 years later, we find ourselves organizing around the same injustices that he and others were: poverty, systemic racism, militarism, but also ecological devastation and this false narrative of Christian nationalism, which kind of holds these injustices in place and blames the poor for their poverty rather than the systems that are their root cause. And we're really organizing around this reality that, again, we live in a country of great abundance, of great wealth, the wealthiest country in the world. But there are 140 million people who are poor or one emergency away from being poor. And that is a moral and economic crisis. And these people are of every color, ethnicity, race, gender, and sexual orientation, age. They live in every part of the country, and therefore we are organizing in every part of the country. We have coordinating committees in more than 40 states, networks of national partners, including the Food Recovery Network. We work with unions, faith denominations, everything, because that's the scale of the problem at hand. And when we think about community disinvestment, I think how we would talk about this is that we see communities all across the country that, on the one hand, don't have enough of what they do need and have maybe too much of what they don't need. And so that might look like, Pamela Rush, who lived in a mobile home in Lowndes County, Alabama. She died during the pandemic of COVID-19, but she also died from systemic racism and from poverty, which kept her and her community from having a sewage system. So she had to live in her mobile home with her children with raw sewage, in the backyard. It looks like Mindy, a white low-wage worker from Maine, who's been working at McDonald's for 19 years, earning less than a living wage, less than $15 an hour, which is another form of community disinvestment, leaving her and so many others without decent jobs, decent work, or any of the means to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. It looks like, communities across the country in Detroit and South Carolina and other places where water is shut off. And people don't have access to clean water. They don't have water running through their homes. In Michigan, even though they're living next to one of the largest sources of fresh water in the world, more than 100,000 people have had their water shut off. And then if we think about kind of the other side of disinvestment, it looks like Lupe de la Cruz, her community in South Florida that had a detention center, a children's detention center, nobody needs that was built on top of a Superfund site that was actually a polluted military base, right? Or Reverend Hooker, who's a minister from South Carolina, a small town in South Carolina that doesn't have jobs, but has a prison and tanks. What do they need any of that with? So we have these countless stories of what it looks like when communities have not enough of what they do need and a whole bunch that they don't need. And this is a deliberate process. This isn't an accident. It's the result of policies and laws that are actively deciding how to allocate, how to distribute the wealth and resources that we do have, and who gets them and who doesn't. And we refer to this in the campaign as policy violence that's wrapped up in those 5 injustices. And our response is to organize those who are impacted by that violence, organize 140 million across these United States to build up their organization, to change the narrative that this isn't the fault of the fact that Mindy's been working at McDonald's for 19 years. That's not her fault. That's the fault of a system that relies on poverty and racism and militarism to keep people poor and keep the things we need out of our communities. And we change the narrative by changing the narrator. Regina, the story of your life and the lives of so many other people are the stories that we lift up in this campaign, and that I, as the policy director, draw on to figure out what policies we do need that actually come out of these same stories. The testifiers at our events, they're not just the victims of injustice, they are visionaries of the world we need and the world we know is possible. And they are the leaders that who we are following. And through their stories, through that's what directs our research and analysis. And we engage people in all different kinds of work: cultural organizing, direct action, outreach, political education. And in fact, next June, we're organizing a massive mobilization of poor people and low-wage workers coming to DC on June 18th. We invite everybody here on this call to join us, reach out to everybody and because this is, again, it's both, we don't just curse the darkness, we bring the light, right? So it's both what we're missing, but what more we have and what more we deserve. And so in addition to, joining us in June, I wanted to share a new publication that we have that you can find. I'll put the link in the chat. It's called We Cry Justice. And let's see, maybe I can't get in the chat. It's called We Cry Justice. And I just wanted to, so these are stories from leaders in the campaign, people who are impacted by these injustices, just saying, what it means to be with the campaign and to be living in these times. And I'll end by this quote from Idaline Bobet, who grew up in Kensington, Philadelphia, one of the poorest places in the country. And what she says is that many people living in the US share my story, but they remain silent for fear of being shamed and called lazy. Those in power will try to deny our message by attacking who we are and how we speak. They will shift the blame for our problems back onto us. But when you organize together, you affirm that you do matter, that you are worthy, and that you must cry out for justice. So I'm bringing Idaline, Pamela, Mindy, all of these people from our campaign to our conversation today. And again, just thankful to be here.
Shailly, thank you so much. That was such inspiring and difficult things to hear and to absorb. So just a reminder to everyone about that wonderful self-care of taking deep breaths. This might feel new for some of you. this conversation is about not shying away from what is difficult, but coming together as a collective to say that we recognize that something is deeply wrong, and that in our day-to-day, whether it be through policy like Shailly and the Poor People's Campaign, and whether it be through our individual support of one another and everything in between, these are how we work to raise our voices towards that. I love this term. I had not heard this term before, policy violence. And so as we typically do in our conversations, what I would like to do is, you haven't met them yet formally, we will do that, but this is a conversation. So I would like to turn to Niciah and Tiana to see what your thoughts are on what you heard from Shailly. And either one of you, please do go first.
So a few things came up, a lot of things. And Shailly, thank you for the bringing the stories, centering the narratives, and really the work that you guys are doing in the Poor People's Campaign. One of the last things that you mentioned was a story of a woman who lived in Kensington, Philadelphia. So I actually just moved back to DC from Philly during the pandemic. And Kensington, as you noted, is a community where we see a lot of disinvestment happening, but we also see, therefore, a lot of sickness in the community, a lot of drug addiction in the community, and a lot of incarceration in the community. And so wanted to name and uplift it. Like, when we're seeing the disinvestment, we're also seeing other ramifications. We're seeing mental health. We're seeing folks sick. We're seeing high levels of addiction. We're seeing folks being incarcerated. We're seeing, a rise in incarcerations for drug-related instances and sex work and Black economy work and things like that. And so the ramifications of disinvestment and the lived lives of folks who are living in disinvestment, the consequences take so many forms. I just wanted to uplift that. I had a question. This is kind of like a thought question or ideological question. Some of it may be like a historical analysis question, but like, what are your thoughts in terms of the roots of disinvestment? What causes society to say, well, you know what, we invest in certain communities and not others, or some communities are worthy of investment and not others? What is the thinking behind that? And then how do we see that thinking operationalized and materialized in the results that we see across those communities?
Should I? No, I think that's that's a great question. And I mean, I would say that the roots of that are in our economic and political system that that are built on, racist and classist and gendered narratives and systems of power that have disempowered people through generations, right? Through the very beginning. The beginning of this country is this country is established through the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations, and through that, that logic is then carried through the enslavement of people, the exploitation of people from all around the world. And that's, we bear the consequences of that today. And through all of that, there have been policies and I would say kind of deep, moral or immoral, I would say, justifications for that, right? During the times of slavery, there was a slave Bible that actually ripped out parts of the Bible. So slaveholders ripped out parts of the Bibles so slaves would not have access to them. So they wouldn't know that, in fact, the Bible is a text of liberation for the poor. And so, there are deep moral and religious and spiritual roots to the disinvestment that we see today that has its roots in the, of generations. And that's why I think we take up this charge so seriously. We call out Christian nationalism right alongside these other injustices. And it is, economics, it is politics, it is spiritual, and we have to confront all of that. And that's why we're calling for really a broad-based movement where everybody, we may not be poor today, but I tell you, we're in the same position of the poor today because of this system. And that's why we got to figure out that we're on the same side, and then, come together. We are great. Our numbers are greater than anything. And if we can organize ourselves to take account of those numbers, we can really shift the whole direction of this country. We've seen it before, and we can do it again.
Shailly, thank you for I think sometimes we shy away from naming like the morality of the issues and the spiritual implications of the issues. And some of that has to do with like whether or not we have cognitive space for that and like how our public dialogue has kind of shifted us to like focus on the policy and not focus on like what's happening spiritually when we're doing this, or like focus on the policy but not talk about what happens energetically when someone is dehumanized, right? And um, I was on the way to law school and I ended up in seminary instead. And the reason I went to seminary was because part of your answer, like I realized that some of the things we're trying to address with policy are actual moral issues and ethical issues and spiritual issues. And so like the both end is super important. So thank you for naming that.
Wonderful. Tiana, do you have any response, thoughts on what you've heard thus far?
Yeah, I think one of my thoughts would be, how do you navigate like working with people who are food insecure in terms of like money, like in jobs? I feel like a lot of times, you know, when we are in contact with these people and we realize they're a great need, where sometimes people aren't offering to cook them meals themselves or give them jobs and make them our equal peers. So I wonder how, you know, you are grappling with that.
Yeah, so so the Poor People's Campaign is a national campaign that's rooted in 45 or 40 or so different committees, and each one of those state committees is responsible for organizing on the ground. So a lot of them, you know, there are networks of different food banks and food pantries and food distribution programs that are connected with different states depending on what they are doing. So I know, you know, in North Carolina, in Mississippi, in parts of New York, in California, across these different committees, in Texas, in different parts of the Midwest, people are, you know, in our state committees are actively involved in different programs to meet those needs and pulling them into the broader kind of movement orientation that, that is necessary. And so to kind of fill the longer term need that food insecurity is a reflection of. And so anyhow, yeah, and we work with the Fight for 15. They're very close partners to kind of make sure that all of these things remain connected. We can't solve the food insecurity problem with also addressing, you know, that's a jobs problem, that's a health problem. As you were saying, Niciah, it's an emotional crisis, it's a housing issue, like all of these things are connected. And that's one of the ways that we've seen partial solutions is when we only take a piece of it. And then, some of my friends and colleagues who work in different parts of the food justice world, they'll say they never have a conversation about living wages in their, they're working in food policy, but they never talk about living wages. And so, we say that, it is necessary to meet the needs of people now and build the kind of organization, the kind of movement that can secure those needs in the future. So that's our approach.
Amazing. Now for everyone listening in, please keep your questions coming, your thoughts, what are you feeling? For some of us, the topics that we've all just put out, any one of them could feel like a lot, and this is about our practice, how are we absorbing more information about how our communities are thriving or why they are not thriving, and there are so many different reasons for that, but as a unit we can see what the drivers are. So just keep that in mind. Again, feel the self-care that you might need. As I know that my brain is feeling like it's expanding a lot. I'm feeling very excited and very activated right now. And so the point again is to widen our aperture of understanding and move us into thought. And Shailly just gave us a few really cool things that are happening with the Poor People's Campaign. I hope to see you there in June. I know that I'm going to be there, and we will in partnership, tell our whole network about this gathering. I would like to move on to Niciah Mujahid. I just met Niciah several months ago, and we've been in touch. And for me, the reason why I specifically wanted Niciah to be part of this conversation is in thinking about where Niciah works, the DC for Budget Coalition, and understanding a bit more about how, when we think about our federal policies and the federal activations that are around, but when we think about the state policies and we think about our cities or our rural, counties, whatever they might be, what does that look like? And how do we raise our voices to ensure that in every facet, we are trying to address areas where we can see communities that are not thriving, and we cannot stand for that any longer. And so I feel like with the work that Niciah does, we can begin to see, when we think about the conversation that Shailly just led us into, and we think about the work that Niciah will talk more about, and then we move into Niciah's topic, we can see how that is it's all connected. But again, I would like to turn things over to Elaine to introduce more formally Niciah Mujahid.
Thank you. Niciah Mujahid is an award-winning activist, scholar, writer, and educator, and a devoted wife and mother. A fourth-generation and returning Washingtonian, she graduated from the Howard University School of Divinity with a master's in social justice and ethics after earning a bachelor's in political science and Africana studies from the University of Notre Dame. Before joining the DC Fair Budget Coalition, her career focus was at the intersection of Black healing justice and multi-level policy. In 2017, she founded an organizational space that works to normalize spiritual and holistic wellness for Black and Indigenous people as the foundation for political sovereignty and liberation. She now works as the coalition director at the Fair Budget Coalition, reallocating resources toward the underserved and historically oppressed in DC. She works to incorporate intentional imagining, play, and ritual in her work toward dismantling systems and building new ones in their place. Niciah is the mother of 2 girls and wife to an amazing and supportive movement lawyer. When she's not working, she's likely facilitating healing spaces on the South Side, studying religion, meditating, and spending intentional time with her daughters or sitting beside the Anacostia River. And thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thank you for having me. So I want to start off, hey, Shirley, thanks for the shout out, sis. I want to start off with saying just a few words. I prepared a couple slides, and I'm going to talk really not so much about the work that we do at Fair Budget, but really want to talk a little bit about the relationship between disinvestment and criminalization of poverty and how that leads to food and access as corporal punishment of poor people. And then we'll swing it back around to how resource reallocation can kind of shift the sides there. I want to start off with a few opening statements as Elaine is pulling up the slides that I made. One, the state maintains white supremacy through disinvestment, then criminalization of poverty, and creates othering through disinvestment. Disinvestment is also a way to expand empire and take power, to prevent self-actualization in certain communities, and to extract energy and resources from a lower class for the benefit of an upper class. Resource reallocation is how we combat disinvestment, and specifically liberatory resource reallocation and Black liberatory resource reallocation is how we combat disinvestment, okay? So with that, I'm going to talk us through a couple ideas and theories and just things that we know about these issues. But later on, I'm going to open up some questions for folks. I'm going to ask that you guys ask to unmute yourselves to kind of answer the questions, all right? So for the first slide, again, we are looking at the intersections between disinvestment, criminalization, and corporal punishment, right? And how that affects food access. And we can move to the next slide. So I'm going to talk us through, I'm sorry, Elaine. Okay, there it is. So 4 main points I want to touch in on. One,
Should I go ahead one slide?
yes, please. Okay, so first we're going to talk about disinvestment and the criminalization of poverty. I'm going to say a lot in 6 minutes, y'all. So a couple things, we might want to come back to a few things as for the term is, and that's cool. I'm going to try to say a lot in a little bit of time. Disinvestment and criminalization of poverty, right? So how disinvestment works alongside the state's response to poverty towards criminalization of disinvested communities. 2, we're going to look at the criminalization of Black and brown bodies. Disinvestment happens within a context, and part of the context is the fact that within this state, within the United States, also within DC in particular, Black and brown people are criminalized just for existing within Black and brown bodies, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that has showed up. Another part of the context that we need to name is the relationship between criminalization and corporal punishment, right? And so we're going to here at this point add in the knowledge that the criminal code in this country employs corporal punishment as its primary response mechanism, right? So when folks are criminalized, what do? We punish them corporally, right? So we're going to look at how folks are punished corporally within carceral settings as a result of being poor, but also how poor people in our communities are punished corporally for being poor, right? Because both of these things are true and they mirror each other. And finally, we're going to look at food access and corporal punishment of the poor, right? And so considering food access as a form of corporal punishment in poor Black immigrant communities and globally as punishment for countries that are considered in the global South. All right, cool. Let's move to the next slide, please, Elaine. All right, so one, want to make the point that disinvestment meets criminalization of poverty, right? So whenever we see disinvestment, we are going to see criminalization because, as we know, and this is in bold, the state responds to economic crisis with policing and incarceration, right? So here is a quote, I'm going to read it. This is from a piece by Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's a political prisoner that he wrote alongside Johanna Fernandez, and they interviewed Angela Davis in this piece. Prisons and policing are repressive mechanisms of the state that are critical to the maintenance of power, especially during periods of political and or economic crisis. As Angela Davis explains in her interview, systems of punishment grew exponentially during two critical moments in the history of US capitalism. The first moment where we saw a growth in systems of punishment was during the post-slavery capitalism. We had an economic crisis and we said, okay, let's answer it with punishment, right? So the end of the Civil War. The second time was during the last decade of the 20th century when we saw deindustrialization and mass immigration produced by capitalist globalism. And so again, in both of these instances, the state responded with policing and incarceration. In both these periods, incarceration was deployed to conceal and render invisible vast social problems that were consequences of economic changes. So in other words, when the state feels like, hey, we are unable to meet the needs of the citizens, the economy is taking a downturn, we don't know what to do, there's too much poverty, they respond with saying, let's incarcerate folks, right? And so which communities are we likely to see over-policed and over-incarcerated? It's the ones that are facing disinvestment, right? And so that's the relationship between incarceration and disinvestment. Elaine, you can go to the next slide. Cool. So again, this is happening within the context of criminalizing Black and brown bodies, right? So these things are happening at the same time and they're not distinct, but there's some intersection and they're working alongside each other. Criminalizing Black and brown bodies takes many forms and has been a central value or principle of this country historically and currently, right? So both public policy, institutional policy, along with dominant culture have continuously punished Black and brown bodies for existing as Black and brown bodies, right? Here are some examples. One, we saw theft of labor and then land from thousands of Black agriculturalists and farmers. We saw hyper incarceration and actual crime rates. We know that white folks are just as likely to commit crime as Black folks, yet we see hyper incarceration of Black communities. There were Teanna laws and prison violence surrounding Black hair. So we've seen instances where the state has punished people for just having Black hair. We've seen laws created to ban Native Americans from living in certain areas. I think Black people weren't allowed to live in Oregon until sometime in the 1900s. Legally. We've seen war on drugs. We've seen Black codes after slavery, Islamophobia, Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, sunset laws, Japanese internment camps, manufactured border crisis, border patrol whipping Haitian immigrants, just happened a couple weeks ago, punishing Black dissidents, Black codes, Latin and South American babies in cages, forced sterilizations of Latin, South American, and undocumented immigrants, right? So these are just some examples of how we see Black and brown bodies criminalized just for being Black and brown bodies. And this is part of the context that we're looking at disinvestment within. And Elaine, you can go to the next slide. And so, as I mentioned earlier, criminalization, here's the formula. So again, if we see economic crisis in our communities, we know the state is going to respond with criminalization. But what does that look like? Well, criminalization depends on corporal punishment in the United States, right? And so ignore that line about our team being made up of excellent professionals. I forgot to take that out of the slide. But the main point here is that when the state is responding with criminalization as a response to economic crisis, it looks like corporal punishment. And so I want to pause here and kind of ask an open question. What does corporal punishment look like? Right, so ask to unmute yourself, answer this, but just a couple quick answers. What does corporal punishment look like in the United States? Elaine, go back. I wanted to, this was the open question that I said I wanted to ask for folks. So again, what does corporal punishment look like? Is anyone familiar with the term corporal punishment? Is this a new term? What does corporal punishment look like in the United States?
And you can just raise your hand and Elaine can unmute you. My team at Food Recovery Network knows that whenever a question like this is posed, we all have different rates that we're processing the question, and we will give everyone space until someone feels so moved to speak. So this is an awkward pause. This is us doing the work with Niciah. So I really look forward to hearing. Great. Looks like we're going to bring Jasmine into the conversation. Thank you, Jasmine. And I think we should be able to unmute you.
Yes, thank you. I would say corporal punishment is like immediate violence committed by police or even like community violence, like when you act out and then you are punished for it. So calling the police, being perhaps mistreated or thrown in jail. Like that is my idea of what corporal punishment is.
Thank you for that, Jasmine. That's right on. So police brutality is a part of that. Being confined and caged is a part of that, right? Incarceration itself is a form of corporal punishment, because anytime you put a human being in a cage, that is punishment towards the person's body.
And then we also have like the disenfranchisement after you've been arrested, and like even though that should be the punishment, it's generally there's the stigma behind it. Then you can't get a job, and then it's like a self-fulfilling cycle.
Thank you for that, Jasmine. Do we have any other ideas or answers for what corporal punishment looks like in our context?
Looks like Carissa also has a hand raised, so Elaine, maybe we could unmute Carissa.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I also just wanted to speak of something that's a little bit of a new age kind of thing of corporal punishment. All the points that everyone addressed, I totally agree with, but I think now there's this form of influence that people are taking on to continue to perpetrate that bashfulness of being disenfranchised. Like now you may have more people, like let's say there's policymakers that may believe that these people may not deserve something. But then there's also this group of people who may agree with them based on the way that they think, and they continue to perpetrate or push those ideals for others to adopt those mentalities, to continue the corporal punishment, even if those thoughts were not their original ideas. It's kind of like that birds of a feather flock together. It may not be all the feathers, but they have a feather that's similar. So they adopt those ideas to continue the cycle of like corporal punishment. You see the trolling, you see the harassment. It becomes more so mental as well as the physical punishment that we see today.
Thank you for that. So we want to add harassment. We want to add, it sounds like you also said something about surveillance. So surveillance is part of it. Co-opting of thoughts and forcing of narrative can be a form of corporal punishment. Elaine, I'm going to share my screen for the next one, if that's okay.
Great. And Niciah, I love this conversation. One more person has raised their hand, and that is Laura. So maybe we could have Laura's voice, because
Perfect.
I always want to take time when the folks listening in want to participate. So Laura, maybe we can unmute you, and then Niciah, and then after we hear from Laura, we can move on to the rest of your conversation. And I'm so looking forward to hearing what Shailly and Tiana have to say as well. So Laura, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, well that is totally fine, Laura. Maybe if you would like to chat some of your thoughts there, that is totally great. So Niciah, please continue with this wonderful conversation.
In addition to some of the answers that we've already shared, and thank you guys so much for contributing your thought and your leadership in this space and lending your voices. Corporal punishment also looks like incarceration. It looks like extracted labor. It looks like legalized wage theft. It looks like policies that allow for sweatshop labor. In prisons and jails, it looks like forced slavery. See 13th Amendment. Also watch 13th, the documentary if you haven't. Sometimes corporal punishment looks like, again, like enforced labor within carceral systems. And sometimes this labor itself is food producing labor. And so often folks who are incarcerated, many of whom we know became incarcerated through poverty, they grow and harvest the agriculture that we eat in our grocery stores. They cook for the prisons. They make utensils, plates, and serving trays for companies like Sodexo, companies that supply our foods for universities, military, and you guessed it, other prisons, right? And so they are part of the food economy, but in a way that, again, the labor is extracted and it's a form of slavery. And so the relationship between disinvestment, poverty, criminalization, and then food access is again interconnected and located. It also looks like agriculture performed in carceral spaces, as I named, migrant workers and workers' rights, and those who are working in situations where it's extracted labor, but there's no health. It looks like labor without health insurance, and it also, again, just naming that labor in disinvested communities is not self-sustaining labor, but state-sustaining labor. It also looks like death by food, right? And so
it seems like perhaps Kaya and this is our first technical difficulty. There we go.
Okay.
Niciah, we lost you a little bit. At the very beginning, you said it looks like death by food, so maybe we could.
Got it. Okay. So corporal punishment also can look like death by food or lack thereof, right? And so, for instance, within prisons, the food that's offered within prisons often causes more harm than good and can be best thought of as matter that provides just enough nourishment to avoid killing the prisoner, right? So we're going to give you just enough so that you don't die today. That's what you think. We also see death by food, i.e. food weaponized as a response to criminalization occurring in disinvested communities. So again, when we think about community disinvestment and food access, and we think about food as corporal punishment, how do we think of food deserts as corporal punishment of the poor? How do we think of lack of food access as criminalization and corporal punishment of Black and immigrant bodies, right? How do we think of resource hoarding, and again, like just the lack of land justice and the inability of communities to produce their own food as a form of corporal punishment for poor people? And so what do we do about it? It's complicated, this is nuanced, a lot of intersections. And so this last slide challenges us to think about agriculture and land justice, food justice, abolition, and decriminalizing poverty, right? And those are like the four main things we kind of got to think about. So we got to begin to make systemic change to shift power and to dismantle systems, including ideologies, at the intersections of abolition, land justice, agriculture, and decriminalization. And then I listed some local organizations and campaigns that are doing this work. Duke and Poverty is one of them, PACA DMV, DC Green, Soul the City, which is Black-led farmers market on the South Side, Fair Budget Coalition, because we are doing the resource reallocation work, defund NPD, et cetera. We got some books and essays, documentaries, films, and I'm going to stop here. And that is my spiel.
Amazing.
Investment and criminalization in food.
Niciah, thank you so much. I know that this was, you just dropped a lot of knowledge on us, a lot. And again, it might have been groups that we haven't heard of before, the intersectionalities that we might not have considered before, maybe we have. Keep writing in the chat. Know that we are going to share so many resources with you. You know, this is our formal request that all of you, join us in this journey and join us in this work. But Shailly and Tiana, I would love to hear briefly, because we do want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Tiana, what your response was to, what you heard from Niciah.
I really appreciate the way that you laid everything out, Niciah, and I do this, the notion of the criminalization and almost the pathology, turning poverty and all these things into a pathology, a sickness that has to be cured. What happens is, at least, from our history and perspective, and I can see this reflected in I'm thinking about this and as you were sharing these narratives that poor people are lazy, so they have to be retrained, or something, that they're crazy, so you can't trust anything they're saying, that they kind of it takes the whole it takes the individual and treats the individual rather than the symptoms that are at the root causes of that. And I think that that's very damaging, and it's damaging to our bodies, as you're saying. It's damaging to our mental and emotional health and the health of our communities. And one thing it reminded me of was there was this celebrity chef, I forget his name even, Jamie Oliver, is that a celebrity chef? He was I don't know, whatever. So it's some celebrity chef, and he was going to do this thing where he's going to go into a poor community in West Virginia where everyone's overweight. They don't know what to do, this, that, and the other. He's going to teach them what to do about food. And it was very insulting to the people there who said, we've lived here for generations, and we used to be able to work our land before it was taken away. We used to be able to, when a neighbor was hungry, we would plant another row in our garden. And that's how we sustained each other. But as our land has been taken away, as it's been poisoned by the coal companies, as it's been, all of these things, our ability to take care of ourselves has also been taken away. And so I just think that there are deep, again, roots to this violence, to the criminalization, to the corporal punishment that people have been suffering for generations. And just really appreciate what you share.
Tiana, before we hear from you and your incredible voice to your thoughts and reflections, I did we are talking about this idea, this concept called the collective, and how we as a collective can look at the architecture of what ensures that communities are not thriving. And I think we've raised up a lot of different areas around that. I did want to pop in a couple of resources, it's generic term resources, and make it into a very specific thing. So first, I wanted to highlight the podcast Food Tank from one of my very dear friends. It's called Food Talk with Danny Nuremberg. So Danny is a dear friend of mine from Food Tank, and in it she highlights just a couple of weeks ago a new book that was written by Raj Patel and a doctor whose name, a new person to me, I don't quite remember her name, but it's called Inflamed. And I definitely highly recommend Food Talk with Danny Nuremberg as ways to get in other voices, other perspectives of how people are working the land or not being able to work the land, saving seeds. So that's really critical. And then there's another podcast that I don't remember the name of it. It's like Jacobian Radio or something like that. I'll put it in the chat myself, but it is talking about the collective. And so if this is a term that feels new to you, and we do think about, our culture growing up, the individual, our bootstraps and all of these things, when we begin to agitate around the myth as a way to sort of keep us all subjugated across, other powers that be. I just wanted to offer those things, but Tiana, please, what are your thoughts?
I guess my thoughts would be like how difficult or what might come up in educating people about violence that happens because of the state, and the need to turn away from looking to the state for any justice.
I think one of the biggest difficulties there is creating the cognitive space of knowing that you exist within a space that may identify you as an enemy. And then okay, how do I navigate this space, right? And creating space, like you said, to say, okay, well, I have this myth and this idea in my head that the state has been here to take care of me, or the state, has my best interest at hand. And, sometimes it's difficult to get folks to think about state-induced violence simply because it's scary to know and to reckon with how much violence is enacted by the state, right? And that's the point, right? The point of keeping folks in fear, and the point of keeping folks dispossessed is so that they can't begin to challenge systems, right? But the best way to do that is as a collective. And so as we build collective power, as we heal as a collective, as we check on each other and create our own systems of care, then it feels a little bit safer to say, well, you know, maybe the state don't have me, but my homies do, right? Maybe there is somebody who can put an extra row in their garden. You know, maybe there is someone who is interested in sharing with me and building share economy. So really tapping into community care, I think is the way that we overcome that challenge. Because Tiana, to your point, I think your question like is the answer. That is the challenge, right? Like the challenge is creating the counter narrative, and it's difficult to accept the counter narrative when we haven't created community-based actions.
Amazing. I really quickly wanted to say a thank you to everyone who's participating in the chat, including, you know, as we in real time are talking about some of these resources. So thank you all. And specifically too, I wanted to say to Sarah, for apologizing for being late. You're not late, you're right on time. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for walking with us for the rest of this way. I also wanted to just say, we have about 15 more minutes or so with Shailly. We will keep the conversation going, but we know that Shailly might have to move on to the next portion of her day. And so that might mean we pause for a second so that we can be sure to get Shailly's reflection. So I just wanted to put that out there for folks as I transition us to hearing from Tiana. So I became aware of the work of the Fair Budget Coalition because of Tiana, again, months ago, when I was thinking about, you know, I love this swirl of thoughts that we have and experiences and in action work that we have around policy, but also around the human neighborly care that we have for one another. It's just so important. And so Tiana is going to talk with us a bit about, you know, her experience, you know, having worked at the Fair Budget Coalition, but also, okay, so here we are, we're hearing things about policy, we're hearing things about, you know, how we are enacting on communities in some very unfair ways, in unfair structural ways. Again, those deep breaths, those practices that we have around self-care, because we are absorbing a lot. We really are. Tiana's going to talk with us about what does that mean? You know, how do we spring into action when we hear these things? You know, each of our guests today did have, you know, they have some action items for all of us. And, you know, our chat is full of resources. All of those translate into action. But I'm so thankful that Tiana is here. And again, I will turn things over to Elaine so that we can more formally hear about Tiana's background.
Thank you. So Tiana is a 24-year-old content creator from the Bronx, New York. Tiana has amassed over 110,000 followers across social media platforms. She creates content that allows her to encourage her following of primarily Black women across the world to become more comfortable talking about anti-capitalism, Black feminism, socialism, and more. Her upbringing, willingness to embrace updated radical approaches, and a love for pop culture allows her to create relatable content for her audience, which ranges in age from 18 to 35. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to read out the description, or I'm used to saying description. Okay, so hello, Tiana, and I'm currently a content creator. I primarily make YouTube videos on various topics that include mixing pop culture with anti-capitalist information. Throughout my life, many things have radicalized me, and I always feel compelled to share what I'm learning with as much transparency as possible, even though sometimes it gets me in trouble. So within the community that I have been trying to create online, we have been engaging in tough and sensitive topics. People have hosted live streams with 80 to 300 viewers at once, with a total of like 5,000 views when we're done. And this is not my accomplishment alone. It is almost impossible to replicate this engagement in different environments. I could not do this without everyone who tunes in and contributes. My audience is mostly Black women or Black people who are queer, and we find ourselves connecting gentrification, food inequity, sustainability, taxes, voting, defunding the police, anti-Blackness, and more through these lives specifically, though I make standard long form content. The longest we have been on live has actually been 8 hours. I know it seems like a long time, but we laugh, we rant, we look up information in real time. We also have a Discord where those of us who are most engaged continue conversations. And I truly believe that is what is missing in a lot of spaces that attempt to address social justice issues, is the actual time it takes out to flesh out these topics, making people truly feel included and during that time. I recently read Mutual Aid by Dean Spade. That book is phenomenal because it is extremely real and practical when talking about how to take care of community. Spade addresses the importance of flat structures without top-down dictation that hinge on degrees as credible expertise. Many times in organizations, the community members who provide so much experiential knowledge are regulated to low pay or not compensated at all as volunteers. Spade addresses that people should be getting paid equally if there is money to compensate those doing community work. And Spade also talks about the human connection that should be embraced, like dating, reasonable expectations, and communicating boundaries when working with others. And lastly, what will get people to stick around and have a stake in trying to connect the dots and not flake? So that's also what I attempt to do when I try to get people to listen to me. So like this stuff isn't just so boring, you know, what will actually make people want to be here for a long period of time? So with what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to connect, of course, money and also feeling valued. And also like an alert to people, because I feel like, you know, when we have jobs, a lot of the times we forget that our jobs are to survive. A lot of social justice jobs make us feel like we're doing something righteous and then in that case, we get exploited because we're really there to have money to live, right? And then we choose certain jobs that have sometimes low wages in the social justice world because we think that we're doing something great when actually now we're getting exploited for doing something great. So I'm trying to also alert like potential people that get into social justice work to still demand like what you need, you know, if you're doing this kind of work. Also, we should embrace intergenerational conversations. I also see way too many panels with like, and not to be shady, but older adults with degrees and no young people eager to have their thoughts for the world affirmed and legitimized. I feel like young people get left out of so many conversations until it's too late, or we're subjected to tasks and our superiors don't want to do. When we get jobs in the social justice field, we don't feel equal, like our presence matter outside of work responsibilities. There is a disconnect sometimes between paid advocates with familial safety nets and everyday people who are working class in the advocacy world. I've been in so many meetings that attempt to build community in 1 hour with an agenda that only focuses on deliverables to qualify and win campaigns. There is no room for venting about the current reality and actually sharing resources with one another. I recently posted a video reflecting on my own mortality. And when I was organizing, sometimes I felt like my life didn't matter while I was working to make sure that others did. I talked to other organizers that worked for places that promised to mobilize for workers in the fast food sector, retail, and teachers, yet those same organizers faced racism, job insecurity, and exploitation doing that very same work. There should be a shared solidarity when doing social justice work that does not replicate the same structures that our target communities are dealing with. And my YouTube channel alone does not do the work. It spreads political education in a way that is interesting. I think people can't do the work without lots of education to build a shared foundation and trust. So when it is time for us to, you know, do things that are a little more risky and put our bodies out there, we have some shared, like real shared solidarity. So also specifically in a video that I did about infographics and activism, because a lot on social media now, there's so many infographics and people share them and feel like the job is done. I urge viewers to look directly in their communities to start addressing whatever topic is of interest. Understand the history of the current area you're in. What do you and your neighbors need? What are the root causes of those issues? I'd recommend before any action, doing more relationship building and learning circles. I also urge viewers to read together and simply talk out loud to get used to saying things that they care about. So when the time comes, you know, they feel confident. And I jokingly mentioned how the revolution will be very awkward because many of our interpersonal skills suck. I mentioned my presence online is typically around anti-capitalism. So here is a zine that I will put in a chat that is visually engaging. You know, I think the biggest thing I'm trying to take home is I want these conversations to be interesting, like just interesting. You know, I think it's like, it's unreasonable to expect that when powerful information is being shared, though it could be very boring, for people to just pay attention and want to be there. No, we're humans. We want to be entertained. We want to laugh. We want to have fun. We want to have the shared ability to speak, you know, and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty much like what I'm trying to say. And that's my theory as to why, like, I can talk to so many people on YouTube, but then when community meetings or stuff happen, people don't feel comfortable going. Like, what's that disconnect? So yeah, slowly like microdosing certain ideas to my audience. Like, okay, if you like watching me, go do this with your neighbors or something, you know? But I know it's going to take some time. And YouTube currently is providing me that space to actually take the time, like to really, you know, get there with a lot of people. So yeah, that's it.
Tiana, thank you so much. I have a few thoughts about what I just heard, and then I'm going to specifically move over to Shailly, because again, sometimes time is real and we have to be places. And so maybe we'll hear from Shailly, including maybe Shailly, some of your concluding thoughts, so that if you need to move away from this conversation into the next part of your day, that's not a problem, and we welcome that. So one of the reasons why I started Intersectionalities in Practice was actually, well, two reasons. I was trolled. FRN was trolled on 2 listservs. Somebody who was very dissatisfied with the position, a job that we were hiring for, and you know, it caused me a lot of distress and a lot of I was very upset, because it denied the journey that Food Recovery Network was on in terms of our equity walk. We, you know, by no means are forever, like we're not like already there, right? There's a lot of improvements that we know that we can make along the way, and every step of the way I've been very transparent and very vocal about that. But the other reason why I started Intersectionalities in Practice is because, Tiana, to your point, I am blessed with the ability to have so many deep, rich conversations with people. That I really needed other folks in our network to hear some of the things that I get to hear. And so I think you're right, Tiana, that it does take a little while for people to hear these things, to learn. You know, if any one of us thinks about who we were 10 years ago and what we knew and what we didn't know, and compare that to how we are now, that's a journey, you know, and it does take a little bit of time for us to feel comfortable, you know, showing up, B, showing up and participating. And so again, I just really thank everyone who, you know, raised their voices during the conversation, our listeners, and contributed to the chat. I also wanted to highlight from our Intersectionalities in Practice, the How to Build Better Nonprofits, which was our very first Intersectionalities in Practice, that directly talks about a lot of the stresses and the harm, you know, that can go into our bodies when we are trying to do social justice work. And so there's a lot of resources there, but also a huge acknowledgement that, you know, doing the work of an activist is one way that, yes, we pay our bills, and it is a way for us to be in action with the kinds of communities and the kind of world that we want to live in. You know, to your point about this long form, and, you know, that the information that you have, Tiana, is of interest to folks. I think about probably once a quarter, I listen to speeches by Dr. King. So, you know, shout out again to the Poor People's Campaign. But in particular, I remember once listening to the I Have a Dream speech. It is one of my favorite things of all time. And I was sharing the speech with a friend of mine, and he was like, oh, you know what? I believe it was Common has the I Have a Dream speech overlaid with some of his music. And he played that to me, and there was just some really wonderful beats, you know, alongside Dr. King. And he's like, I remember and can hear the words that he's saying when there's music to it versus when it's just by himself. And so there is this honor in recognizing that there are many different ways that people can hear information, sit with information, how it's presented to them, and, you know, ways that we can all be activated. And so, Tiana, thank you for that. Shailly, I would love to hear, I know you have to go soon, but yeah, please.
Yeah, I won't take long also because I see that there's someone else with a question, but I do want to ask Tiana, I think this point you made towards the end of your talk about how to use the position that you in, the audience that you have to move people into action. And I wanted to ask, what is it that you think keeps people from doing that? And therefore, then how do we encourage that to happen? Because I think all of us here are actually on the ground, organizing people, and we need more of that to happen. So I'd just be really interested to hear your lessons and insights on that.
Sorry, real quick, say the beginning again. What keeps people from engaging in like the community work?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying? So one thing that I notice, and this is some like really interpersonal stuff. Some people are really shy and awkward, and some people don't understand, one of the ways I feel comfortable interacting is through my videos. Some people don't feel comfortable like that. And then some people need someone like either me or whoever else to call things out. And I think there's consequences too. So for example, in the world of professionalism, you can't really call things out. So you fear losing your job, resumes, all this stuff. So it's people have those fears too. So it's I find myself okay, if I'm in a lucky position where I don't have too much to lose right now, what can I say to uplift other people, So it's stuff like that. Some people are really shy. They're just not used to talking that much. So they rather type or they rather listen, or people have a lot of social anxiety too. We don't talk about that a lot. A lot of professional world it hinges on, what's it called? It's introversion, but extroversion. Oh my God, everybody has to be an extrovert in order to do almost anything, and ableism is a huge one. Accessibility is already dwindling now that things are opening back up. So, and a lot of people I talk to on my channel are like that. And I make sure there's no transphobia, no homophobia, don't care. Cause I don't have currently, when I look for other jobs currently, I don't have to cater to people who can be transphobic, anti-Black. So it's things that make people feel comfortable. When people go out to community meetings, the odds are, how are we going to set those group norms? People are not used to that stuff yet. So some people are comfortable right now online engaging in these spaces. When I do my lives and I share the screen like this, some people don't turn on their camera, sometimes we're in our pajamas or whatever, So it's things like that. It's stuff making people really feel comfortable, dismantling all that professionalism that comes from white supremacy, treating people nicely. I think it's hard. I've seen a tweet and it was a lot of people get on camera, they say some radical stuff, but they're not nice people when the camera turns on, And I think so that's a part of it, being nice and taking that time, listening to people. And sometimes it gets a little weird. I get messages on Instagram and I'm oh, these people feel comfortable sharing all this with me. And, I reciprocate that back and I try to be, held accountable in any way. So yeah, I think that's an answer to it.
I really appreciate that. I mean, I know that in, bridging some of the deep divisions in our work, putting people in relationship with each other is very hard, and we come into conflict all the time. And there's something to be said about working through that. But like you're saying, being able to really listen and hear and be mindful of everything that people are bringing to that. And, so yeah, just thank you. And I'm sorry, I do have to go. Really appreciate Regina and Niciah and, Elaine, Tiana, everyone who's been part of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Shailly, thank you so much. And we will continue on with the conversation. We will make sure that everyone has all of the resources that Shailly mentioned. And please remember, with the Poor People's Campaign, to follow along. We are, with everyone here, we are going to, keep in deep collaboration with Poor People's Campaign. So there's going to be lots of opportunities. I will also say two things before I turn things over to Niciah. One is a tactical. I see that a couple of people have raised hands, which is amazing. So we'll make sure that you have your voice heard. But I did want to say, so my second thing is, I've written a couple of blog posts around emotional labor and emotional work. And so Tiana, to bring that into the conversation around, understanding and knowing whom can we lean on when we have those, questions that we're not quite sure, we can ask those questions in community and in a safe space, to make sure that we are going to the person that we know we can ask to be in that work with us. And sometimes people, you can't like just launch in and expect me to do that emotional work with you and for you. So being a bit more adroit at understanding how that can look as we are on our journeys to understanding more. So I just wanted to put that out there too, because I'm sure that is a whole topic that, everyone here could talk about a bunch. But Niciah, I wondered, what were your thoughts on what we just heard?
I think one of the most important things that Tiana touched on is the question of access. And sometimes we only think about it, we don't think about how, like, the nuances there and like all the complexities there. So like sometimes we'll think about it solely in terms of disability, but we don't think about it in terms of technological access. Or we'll think about it in terms of technology, but we don't think about it in terms of like personality and social type access. And how do we optimize and I think tap into folks, to Tiana's point, everybody isn't comfortable with public speaking. How do we make space for the folks who are like, I'm not turning my camera on, but I can write a hell of a piece about this, right? And how do we validate that work and still build community? But also another really important point that Tiana made was like the importance of community care in doing this work, and normalizing that, and really like how important that is as an anti-capitalist model, but also in terms of just how we're approaching advocacy.
It's amazing. And I know that two people had their hands raised. Elaine, let me know that. Laura, sounds like you have your hand raised. I don't know if that was another like nudge of the mouse or something, but just wanted to give some space to you if you would like to raise your voice to let us know what's on your mind. Perfect, Laura, great.
Hi, can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, so I wanted to just touch on two things really quickly. I know Shailly's not here anymore, but just around anxiety and everything, I would love to do more myself, but it does take a lot for me. Like I don't even have social media at this point because of that. And I haven't had an Instagram or anything for years, because having people critique your, like how you look and what they're thinking about you and all this other stuff, it just gets in my head and it's hard to undo that, but I am working through that. So it's not a question of whether you want to help or not, but how can you help and what can you do in this moment? And I wanted to talk about respectability and money and how that ties into food, and as well as just issues that we have in general, because I'll say that like I'm not really sure, but I do think that respectability comes from slavery. And even when you see like a police officer calling a grown man a boy or stuff like that, it does happen. But within the Black community, it can be hard to talk to people that have a certain viewpoint on things, and I'm older than you and I know what I'm talking about and such, and silence you in that way. Whereas like life has really humbled me and shown a lot that I don't believe in age being the determination of wisdom. You can have wisdom at any age, depending on what you go through in life. So I know I'm like all over the place, but I think like within my family, some people have money and they look down on those who don't have or didn't do things like they did, or we all went to school, so you should be where I am. And when it comes to food and poverty, people are looked down on, especially Black people, especially people in your family. You know what I'm saying? I did it, why can't you? And we need to focus on educating people more about just everything, including food, but education, and like Tiana said, being nice to people and not putting them down for something and listening to people. So thank you for listening to me.
And I know, DeAndre, you had some thoughts too. And then maybe if other people have some thoughts, please raise your hands. And then Tiana and Niciah, I would love to hear, based on what we just heard, what your thoughts are. And then we can maybe move into a question I want to answer from Jasmine, and then we can do some final thoughts.
I don't know if you mentioned Carissa.
Oh, great. That I knew there was another hand. So maybe we could do DeAndre, Carissa, and then maybe time for one more question. if that happens. But then I would love to hear, Tiana, your thoughts, and Niciah as well.
Hi, my name is DeAndre. I'm actually joining you from Canada, but we also had our like Black Lives Matter protests and like Indigenous Lives Matter and all those protests, the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I remember when I went to a Black Lives Matter protest, like I was also being silenced by men who were supposed to be on my side. And that really discouraged me and kind of repelled me from activism in general. So I'm wondering if anyone has like any ideas on how to get out of that mindset.
So I can hop in there. Part of the work that we do, so I'm directing 2 organizations right now. One is Fair Budget Coalition, the other is Urban Temple, which is grassroots organization that bridges healing justice with building political willpower in our communities. And part of the reason that we present healing as like the foundation for this work is that right there. Like, as so many Black Lives Matter protests, we're out demanding an end to police brutality while at the same time violently assaulting, silencing, like sexually assaulting Black women and Black femmes, which means there's some healing work that has to do, right? Which means like, even as we're doing the advocacy work, we have to make sure that we're not doing it from a place of trauma. We have to make sure that we're not recreating white supremacy. We're not recreating misogyny, or we're not recreating transphobia. And so I think, really naming, one, that there's healing work that has to happen, and 2, making sure that we're not separating the activism and the social justice work from the healing that needs to happen is how we make sure we're not replicating that, because it was truly disheartening and again, bewildering, like as a Black woman to again be in these spaces and knowing that Black trans women were being sexually assaulted and physically assaulted, and Black women again were like being silenced and assaulted, which again, we gotta name that healing has to occur. We have to name that this is part of the decolonization process, and part of colonization is violence, right? And so as we're decolonizing workspaces, as we're decolonizing activism and decolonizing our work, centering healing has to be at the forefront of what we're doing.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Thank you.
And Tiana, I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. And then I do know that Carissa also has some thoughts. This has been incredible and continues to be incredible. But Carissa, maybe we can hear from you, and then Tiana, your thoughts, and then I'll lead us into, with love and with care, hopefully, into saying some of our conclusions. But Carissa, if you don't mind.
Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, I just wanted to give a special thank you to Tiana because I'm one of her subscribers, and usually I'm very careful. I understand Laura about not having social media, and social anxiety is one of the things that I've had to conquer. So I'm very aware of the ear gates and eye gates, and being mindful of repetition and how it can affect you. And Tiana has one of the platforms where it's a more positive environment. She talks about topics that are more objective, subjective, and it's coming from places from people that may not look like us and do look like us, but it's being handled in a character format. So I just wanted to give a special thank you for her to doing that, because she exposed me to more people who are on the same wavelength of fighting the same fight. So recently I did get the link that Elaine shared for the campaign, the POUR campaign, I believe. I'm not sure the title, but I signed up for the campaign because I'm in Georgia. So I reached out to the information listed for my chapter. But I also wanted to share something. I currently work on the federal side. I'm a federal employee. I work for the Treasury, and I'm a part of a federal corporation that handles giving back to people for food, shelter, but it seems like it's more of a commercialized organization. A lot of these organizations come off as if they're doing their charity work for being harsh and cold people. And I really feel comfortable in this space because I'm speaking with people who have been affected by it, not people who are trying to utilize the struggles of others to wear as a badge of honor to like navigate from them being harsh and cold people. So I just wanted to thank Tiana. I thank you all for just allowing me to come in this space freely, because I don't feel like there's a lot of room, especially me being in Georgia. I'm from Atlanta, grew up here. So typically coming outside of the mindset of people that have been conditioned here, it's kind of hard because you're typically bashed for it because you're not on the bandwagon. So having the environment of, I'm not a social media person, but I love the platform of, like you are, were talking, that people learn differently. So being able to come on where I can see videos, I learn fast. I think different than a lot of people in my area. So being able to connect and share with other individuals that may not be like-minded as me, but we're sharing the same fight. And I truly appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Carissa. And I will say too, that YouTube could be a strange place for some people who are not used to the sides of YouTube that has a bunch of like educational content. If you just click on a random screen and you go to YouTube, you're not gonna find me. And you're not gonna find a lot of the things that I consume. So it's definitely strange. Social media can be strange and harsh. So I will say, especially thank you to people like Carissa that keep my comment section positive, keep things, it's definitely its own like mind thing, and it's separate. It's weird. Social media and like the world of it is so separate from like a lot of organizations and nonprofits on how you can like genuinely connect with people, because it's hard for like an organization to be a person. Like it's, it's different. But yeah, it's just like it takes its own thing. Like for example, like I think, and even just looking at my channel, some people might not even understand it, but it's like I even have to title things so it's interesting. Like I'm not just gonna be like, watch me explain how Obama is a war criminal and how like his race doesn't avoid him from like his crimes. I have to title that so it's interesting and compelling. And then throughout the video, I have to be interesting and compelling and all the stuff, other media. And that stuff is like, it's hard. It takes like a cultural, whatever understanding. But again, you also have to have nice people that encourage you to keep doing it. So thanks to Carissa.
Thank you. And seeing the different chats that we've had and people being, able to talk about their own personal, whether it be anxiety, I'm talking about, I grew up working poor, and other people are talking about they are still, struggling with that. It is not your fault. When we think about what it means for us to all be together, I am so thankful and grateful for all of you, because I do want this to be a trusted space for us to be in community and learn and share. And when we do have those feelings of discomfort, whatever those might be, that we meet that with curiosity, and we meet that with people that we now know who can share other resources with us and other ways of thinking, and just remind us that, it's good when we can feel agitated. Tiana, please. And you're on mute.
Really quick, I was going to say to DeAndre's point too, that maybe sometimes if you're in spaces that tend to get a little toxic and difficult, to leave if you can. That's always an option. I think some people don't.
Relationships.
Yeah, some people don't want to be seen as like a quitter or leaving, but sometimes you have to, sometimes you have to maybe come back later, whatever, find spaces that are going to be more welcoming, to you. So that's what I would say too. Like sometimes it could be mentally exhausting to try to fight out a situation.
Agreed. Okay, so here we are. What a full, emotionally rich conversation. I just quickly wanted to remind everyone, follow along with Tiana's channel. Make sure, we'll make sure that you have links for both of Niciah's organizations, if that's okay with you, Niciah. I know we came in with Fair Budget Coalition, but it sounds like there's so many other things that we can learn about how you do your work. And of course, Poor People's Campaign. And I do have to say, with these, with the channels and the organizations here, including Food Recovery Network, for some of us, if you have the opportunity to encourage other people to give financially, if you have the opportunity to do that yourselves, please do that. Food Recovery Network, we are engaged in, from now until the end of the year, most nonprofits receive their highest number of donations during that time. We are currently engaged in fundraiser for us to give money to our partner agencies. These are the nonprofits on the front line feeding folks. And then to Jasmine's point, a question about, how can we today make, impact around food insecurity? And that is, yeah, please go to our website, tell other people about Food Recovery Network, tell people about the organizations that you just learned about today, Poor People's Campaign, Fair Budget Coalition, make sure that they know about Tiana's channel. This is how we can get more people to be curious and more people to want to take action, and it just reverberates from there. But within Food Recovery Network, I invite all of you to join us this month of November. We are engaged in what we're calling power hours. They're really fun. They are virtual ways to do some research, to find some farmers and bring that information back to FRN. And 1 hour of volunteer time during these power hours on average translates to 23,000 pounds of food being recovered from farm fields. We need that fresh produce. So I would definitely say, Jasmine, if you can join us during one of these power hours, there's plenty of time slots, please do. I do want to turn things back over to Niciah and Tiana. You know, as I say, thank you to everyone listening in. Please keep looking at our organization, all of our organizations. In December, I'm going to have a month of different activities around a special project. December is my birthday month. And so I'm taking a pause on intersectionalities in practice to do some celebration and awareness raising. And then we will resume in the new year, our calendar year. But Tiana and Niciah, I would love to hear your closing words for all of us. Thank you.
Tiana, I went first last time, so I can defer to you if you want to go first this time.
Okay, so I'd say maybe like all take the time to curate like safe spaces online. I do that on my social media, try to follow people intentionally and, you know, sign off, log off when it makes sense. So that's one, and also trying to figure out ways like my direct community with my neighbors that we can just read, talk, get to know each other and be able to meet each other's immediate needs and actually feel like, you know, we really care for each other. So yeah, that's pretty much my closing thoughts. And just really like vet the people you work with. Like if you're an individual and you are going to get into any volunteer work, really vet people, ask challenging questions. And yeah, take your time. That's all. Thank you.
I want to encourage folks to really lean into community care, just like as a model of resistance, as a liberatory model, as a resource reallocation model, and just like how we can think of structures of creating community care. But two, I want to challenge folks to take 30 minutes, like 30 solid minutes, and write to imagine, which is like, you know, you write through, you're imagining your process, your stream of consciousness, but write to imagine what, you know, given all the things that we learned today, all the things we talked about in the intersectionalities, what land justice would look like for disinvested communities, right? So take 30 minutes for 30 minutes one time, or just write through what that would look like, right? And that will kind of guide the work that you can do next. And, you know, in the last slide, I shared some organizations that are, you know, kind of already doing work that you can tap into, some agriculturalists that you can buy food from, and folks who are like doing co-op work and seed swap work and all those things. So tap into those. Bonus activity though, read Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis, because it really kind of touches on a lot of it. And as a bonus, read Our Prisons Obsolete.
Amazing. We have so much to choose from. How we want to proceed for the rest of our day, how we want to proceed for tomorrow. You know, as I say, if you didn't know before, now you know. And we're here. And, you know, please, as Jan said, take your time. You know, for some of us, we've been doing this for a very, very, very long time. Some of us, this is new, and everything in between. So thank you to everyone, to Tiana, to Niciah, Shailly, Elaine, thank you so much for helping to organize this, and to everyone who participated, whether listening, active with the chat or your voice. I appreciate you. We will have so much wrapped up in a blog post with all the links and resources and desire for more with all of you. So please be on the lookout for that. Probably next week sometime. I will be writing this as I am digesting it, because I heard a lot of new things just like all of you. So thank you all for your patience with that. I'm a slow writer, and this is important. It's important. So we'll have that to everyone very soon. And please, you know, continue to spread the word. And Tiana, or excuse me, Niciah, did you have
Regina, do you have the email addresses of the folks who attended? Teresa's asking if I'm not sure if it's Carissa or Teresa, it's my bad. But she's asking if we can share the book list, but I don't know if we have her email address.
Yes, we have everyone's email list. So
Okay.
yep, we will. So everyone who registered today, you will get an email, and that will have the link to the recording. And we will, as many as we can. We don't want it to be 40 pages, but as many as we can, we will link out because we always drop so many books and blogs.
Yeah.
And yep, so definitely we'll do that. Absolutely. And and as I was saying, it is a request for please be in community with us. This is just the one conversation of what we hope to be many. And so from the Food Recovery Network team and the thousands of people across the country engaged in our network, I just want to say thank you again to everyone collectively here. Self-care, drink some water.
Yes.
And yep, and let's just take a few breaths as we move into the rest of our day. Forever changed. I know that I am. Thank you all so much. Take care, everyone, and be safe. Bye. Thank you.